Welcome to the Pulpit and Porch, previously known as the Small Church Podcast. I'm Tony Marr, and with me is my friend Robert Kell.
Hey everyone, we're glad you're here. The Pulpit and Porch is where we kick back, put up our feet, and talk about real life stuff of ministry, faith, community, and maybe a little sports and pop culture.
Yeah, if you're expecting a perfectly polished sermon, you're probably in the wrong place.
We're more about those honest heart-to-heart conversations, like the ones you'd have on the front porch with friends. Sometimes we stay on track, and sometimes we take the scenic route.
That's half the fun, isn't it? Here we tackle the highs, the lows, and the in-betweens of church and of life. Every now and then, we'll welcome a few friends to the front porch and share stories and ideas that might just change the way that you see things.
So whether you're a pastor, a church leader, or just someone who loves the church, pull up a chair, grab some sweet tea, and let's dive in. Welcome to the Pulpit and Porch. We've got a seat waiting for you.
Welcome into another edition of the Pulpit and Porch Podcast. I am your host, Tony Marr, and I'm excited to have you along this journey with us. Another day, another week, another episode of our show. This week, our intro is going to be a little bit different. Last week, we started off on part 2 of our conversation on Lent. And we got a little bit carried away in talking about baseball, which we often do on this show, but this time went about 20 plus minutes. And so when we got to the end of recording our show on Lent, we were reflecting back and reviewing the episode. And we said, we really loved that conversation on baseball, but we wonder if people who maybe don't enjoy sports like we do will tune out before we get to the conversation on Lent. And the conversation on Lent is something that we feel is important. We had so much feedback from part 1 of this conversation that we wanted to be sure that we didn't lose people before we got into the discussion on Lent. And so we decided to make it 2 parts. So next week, we'll have a special episode of the Pulpit and Porch that's a shorter episode that is just our conversation on baseball. And if you are a sports fan, especially a baseball fan, you'll definitely want to tune into that because Robert has some ridiculous thoughts and insights on rule changes that he would like potentially to see come to Major League Baseball. And I think that he is completely out of his mind. So tune in for that next week. But right now, we want to pick up our conversation on Lent, what it is, and how it can be beneficial to all churches. I hope you enjoy this discussion as much as Robert and I enjoyed having it. Yeah, so we started this conversation last week on understanding Lent, the traditions behind it, the scriptural background behind it, and what it can mean for our spiritual growth or even spiritual detriment. And so we left off last week. We've really dated
Feels like
ourselves
a year ago.
now. We left off last week talking about why do some churches observe Lent and others don't. And we talked about how the churches that tend to follow the liturgical calendar tend to follow Lent and Advent more. But over the course of the last decade or so, I think we've seen more evangelical churches really pick up on some of these traditionally high church practices. We talked about how there are some great benefits that come from these spiritual practices, but there also can be some detriments. And we talked through some of those a little bit. We talked about, does the Bible command us to observe Lent? And no, it doesn't, not in any kind of way. We talked about, are there risks in rejecting traditions like this simply because they're not a part of our history? They're not a part of our denominational background. And we talked about there are some great things that can come from this, but there's also risk in adopting traditions without fully understanding the purpose of them. That the key is to examine whether a tradition or a practice draws us closer to Christ, or if it simply just becomes, last week we talked a lot about, just becomes an empty ritual.
Yeah, and it's like we talk about when we think about the religious leaders in the day, they continue to make these practices more important than the relational side. And, Jesus even, talks about it as our mercy, not sacrifice. And it was all about sacrifice and practice with the religious leaders of the day. And Jesus was more about coming alongside people, but there are these things that Jesus, told us that we should do. And so inside of Lent, and what I would say is for me, it's more about the fasting part of it. Like inside of Lent, though, how do we navigate and journey that space to where it doesn't become, and this is something you even mentioned in the last episode, is that if it's just, I'm not going to eat chocolate, or I'm not going to watch TV, or I'm not going to listen to this type of music for 40 days. And then you've got a countdown. We have a calendar on our wall. That's a digital calendar. And so we can take and change things in it. And there's usually a countdown to something, countdown to Christmas, countdown to state baseball tournament, countdown to, sometimes they're sad, Landon leaving for the summer. I mean, countdown to whatever it is. And we have these rolling things. If that's the moment, if your wall calendar, the minute Lent starts, countdown to me eating my next piece of chocolate, and it's 39 days, 6 hours and 17 minutes, that's a problem, because your focus is on getting back to who you were, not moving forward into someone that God is trying to create you into being. And I think that's where the tension is. It can't just become this mandated process that, I have to do it because everybody is, or, I can't eat meat on this day because that's our fast. But then, man, I can't wait for a steak tomorrow. It's like the reflecting in, why am I giving up meat? Why am I giving up chocolate? Why am I giving up whatever I'm giving up fasting from to move forward? So no, I agree 100%.
Yeah. And we said this last week, and this will come up again later on in the show, I'm sure, as we continue on. But last week I talked about how, for me, I like the idea of 40 days of focus. I don't like the idea of 40 days of self-denial. Because I think what you just said is perfect. I would rather see people commit 40 days to a practice that is going to draw them closer to Jesus, not just simply deny themselves of something that nowhere in Scripture does it say don't eat chocolate.
Yeah.
And so why am I not eating chocolate for 40 days unless it's simply just to check something off the list of, this is a ritualistic tradition that we observe every year, and this year this is what it's going to be, because I've got to pick something, and so this is what it's going to be. And as soon as it's done, I'm right back to the person that I was before, without any change of who I am or where I'm going.
I think that one of the tensions in that is that when we fast, like we've talked about this before inside of fasting, but I'm trying to think who, C.S. Eliot, somebody like that was C.S. Eliot. It's T.S. Eliot and C.S. Lewis. One of these, Churchill, somebody said, like, someone who is not fasting twice a week doesn't really love Jesus. Like, they're talking like just basic fasting, staying away from food 2 days a week and living in that rhythm. And I'm not I think there's this weekly fasting or every other week fasting that we do, that we abstain from food and things like that. When you step into something like Lent, and I've had friends who literally have fasted for 40 days, like from food, and that's fine. I don't know that we're necessarily called to that level of fasting. But when you give up something inside of 40 days for Lent, I think it should be a little bit painful. It should almost be removing an addiction. And in that tension, if you're eating chocolate to the point that you're going, that's what I should give up. If you have a Hershey bar once a week, that's not fasting. That's not Lent. That's just going, what's the lowest common denominator that I can remove from my life and go, I'm fasting. Like it's got to be something. You're like, I get up in the morning and I grab a Hershey Kiss and when I get my coffee, by midday, I've eaten a bag of M&Ms, a Hershey bar, and 3 of those Godiva chocolate thingies. In a week, I probably consume more chocolate than my whole neighborhood does in a month. Like you have a problem. I mean, probably, but like the amount of TV that I consume is probably borderline too much. I use it for a purpose, but I sometimes justify it. So in a space of me doing this, it has created a lot of tensions where I sometimes sit down and go, I don't know what to do. because it's something that I've found a way to brainlessly, and we've talked about brainlessly before, so I don't do it brainlessly, but I've found a way to brainlessly fill my time, even though I may pay attention to what I'm watching while I'm doing it. And so when I get into that space, I'm going, okay, God, what should I do right now that can help me to lean into you a little bit? What's something that I've done today that's probably hurt your heart? And I'm in a space where I'm asking different questions. And so I totally get what you're saying, that this is not, I mean, sometimes I think it should be, if you're doing something for 40 days and you're basically vegetarian and you're giving up steak, that's not a sacrifice. That's just a passive thing. And this might be where you and I disagree a little bit on some of this.
I'm going to push back on you a little bit on this because we talked last week that the basis of this and why it's 40 days leading up to Easter is because of Jesus's 40 days in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Jesus, the 40 days, if we're using that as the example for what Lent is and why Lent is celebrated, then I don't think that what you just said is relatable to that, because as we talked about a lot last week, the purpose of Jesus is 40 days and 40 days throughout, when we see 40 days, 40 years throughout Scripture, is that it's a period that is designed to test us, prepare us, and transition us for what we're going to be and go when we come out. Jesus's 40 days in the wilderness was to test his resolve, to test, was he ready for what's happening, what's getting ready to happen, and then preparing him and transitioning him from where he was to what's going to happen over the next 3.5 years before the crucifixion.
Yeah, but how did he do that?
How did he do that?
Through prayer and fasting.
Right, but the point was to prepare him and transition him into what he was doing. It wasn't to go through a painful act. That wasn't the point of it.
No, but I think that in that, though, he was being fully human. It was incredibly painful. Like being hungry, I mean, not eating for 40 days.
But that wasn't the point. The point wasn't to go through.
Then why do we
pain.
give up stuff? Like, what's the point? Like the point of Lent has always been to give up something because like if we just continue in our normal routine, I think part of it is it shakes things up for us. It causes us to sit in a moment. But we shouldn't continue in
our normal routine. I'm not saying we should continue in our normal routine. And that's where I told you last week, I think what you're doing is a great example of what Lent should be, that you're testing yourself in that you're prepared. You said to your wife 2 weeks ago that I don't know that I will be the same person on the other side of this. That is what Lent is for. To prepare you and transition you for what you're going to be coming out, to make you a better person on the other side than you were. If you're the exact same person on the other side of the 40 days as you were when you went in, I think that you just did something that was a ritual. Jesus was not the same when he came out of his 40 days. The Israelites were not the same when they came out of their 40 years. That there was a transition that took place, and there was something new that they were being launched into, a new purpose, a new mission, a new fulfillment of life that they were launched into as a result of what took place during that 40 period. I talked last week that I think something great to do for Lent would be every day for these 40 days, I'm going to commit to getting up at 6 a.m., 7 a.m., whatever your routine is, and spending 30 minutes in prayer and solitude every day. Maybe for some people that's very painful to get up that early, to spend time in quiet without headphones in, without a TV going, without the radio going, just spend time in prayer and solitude. But you're going to come out of that a different person. There's a purpose, there's a point, there's a goal that I want to see myself become a deeper follower of Christ. I want to see myself look more like Jesus on the other side of this than I was when I came in. I want to see myself with a clearer purpose and mission for who I am and what I'm going to be on the other side of this than when I came in. I don't know that it has to be tied to, oh, this has to be painful. In fact, Jesus even says to those of you that are fasting, don't fast like the Pharisees do and come out with your eyes all droopy and walking around and people are saying, what's wrong? Oh, I've been fasting 40 days. I haven't had anything to eat. Oh, I'm missing so much that I haven't been able to watch my favorite TV show for the last 3 weeks and it's so painful. He says, no, don't let anyone know what you're doing. This is between you and God. This is something that you're doing internally, not for the praise of other people, but to draw you closer to God. And that's the purpose of fasting, is not to deprive myself of something, but to see, and I'm talking food here.
Sure.
That it's not to deprive myself and see how long can I physically go. It's to say that everything that I need is in the Father, that I can rely on God for my nourishment. I can rely on God for my fulfillment. Jesus says, man doesn't live on bread alone.
Yeah. Lust the eyes, lust the flesh, pride of life. I mean, and then Satan really kind of in that temptation at the end of that 40 days, like, was through those three thoughts. I wonder on some level if we disagree or if it's just wording semantics. And I'm about to say something that I do not, you may debunk this in 10 seconds. And so like, I'm going to ask that question in 1 second here, but like, part of the thing is that in the journey, and we can say it however we want to, but when I listen to people speak on, and I'm moving, we were talking about Lent as a big picture, but part of Lent is fasting. We can say it how we want, abstaining from whatever, but like, the best definition for me of Lent is it's 40 days of fasting from something to focus and surrender your life to the Father. There's always some level of pain in fasting. And some of the best teachers that I hear talk about fasting is it's surrendering something, like you said, to show that your nourishment, your life, your focus, your attention, your heart is aligned to the Father. And in those spaces, when your stomach grumbles, when you sit in the chair and you go to grab the remote, when you walk to the cabinet and you open it to get that snack or that treat or that thing, and you reflect and you go, I have a friend whose daughter's in a school, and they are observing Lent, and this 7-year-old kid has given up Sprite. And he's like, it's her favorite drink. It's all she drinks. Like, she loves Sprite. And he said, and I just can't tell you how many times we'll sit down and somebody will go, hey, would you like a Sprite? And she'll go, what day is it? Because their teachers in school said, Monday through Friday, observe this. Weekends, you have a treat. Don't overindulge, but have it, you can do kind of live your normal life. And she'll be like, what day is it? And she's actually carried it through all 7 days. And somebody will go to grab her a Sprite and she'll be like, wait, I can't do that yet. And she's processing and thinking, and at 7, I'm sure it's not all perfect. And so my question would be this, is like the conversation, you think about Noah, you think about the Israelites, you think about Jesus, and I know there's a bunch of other 40 days, incredibly uncomfortable on a boat, navigating, or 40s, in some years, 7 days. There's incredible numbers of 40s, but on a boat, think about wandering in the desert, incredibly uncomfortable. Even though food and things were provided, you're giving up this normalcy of lodging, this normalcy of living. You're kind of moving throughout, incredibly painful. Jesus, we can say what we want, but if he really was fully human, as scriptures teach, I mean, by day 10, I know they say things start to change a little bit, but to get to day 10 and by day 35, like, had to be incredibly painful. And so I do think there's a level of, as we give up things and we step away from that, we're looking at something in a perspective of, as we sacrifice something to focus our hearts and attentions towards the Father, it definitely creates in us a longing for that thing that brings our heart and our mind and our thoughts, our mind, our attention towards what the Father really wants. And I think that's how the shift happens. I don't think the shift, like, I just don't, we were talking about sports earlier, not on the show, but before the show. And I don't know that anything great happens in the normalcy. I think it's in the hard and the sacrifice that we get closer to the goal that we're moving towards so many times, that we learn in those spaces and moments. And so we are not a video show. Tony has actually picked up a paper Bible that the binding is falling off of. So it makes me feel like it's one of those that you put him in a dark room and you say, find Leviticus 4:2, and he could do it with his eyes closed. So I feel like he has, I'm about to get a hammer thrown at me.
Oh, one of my biggest pet peeves is when people take scripture out of context and just use one verse to drive home a point that maybe has, they're not looking at everything else in the full context of it.
And like I said, I
was sitting here and I wanted to make sure I was about to quote a verse for you that I probably would have gotten wrong. So I wanted to make sure I got it right. I love Ecclesiastes 3 that says, I know there is nothing better for men than to be happy and to do good while they live, that everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toils. This is the gift of God.
But that does not, that's the gift of God. And in our sin, we totally move away from that.
But I think this is such the problem with the church today is everything that you just said is that we have made Christianity about this list of rules that we have to follow, and we have to deny ourselves of this and deny ourselves of this and deny ourselves of this. And we have to sacrifice this.
So deny ourselves, take up the cross and follow me. And I know that's not out of context. Deny ourselves, take up the cross and follow me. That is the call.
No, but deny ourselves of things on this, like, well, if you're a Christian, you have to not do this. You have to not do this. You have to not do this. There's a huge difference between denying self and self-denial. And so maybe saying denying self-denial is really what I should have said. So I apologize.
But I love this conversation, by the way. And those of you who think we're mad at each other, we are so not. This is how we talk a lot.
And that's why so many people have turned their back on the church, is because they go to church and they're told, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. In order to follow Jesus, you need to, in order to get to heaven, you have to get rid of this, stop this, stop this, stop this, stop this. You have to live your life like this, live your life like you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. And it's a series of rules. And that's the entire New Testament is saying, no, Jesus came to give you life and to give it abundantly. And so I think saying that no, we have to sacrifice this and sacrifice this. It's about loving Jesus and loving people and following him and drawing ourselves closer to him and looking more like him and being more like him and loving more like him. And I don't know that saying I'm going to take 40 days and not eat chocolate is drawing us there. But saying I'm going to take 40 days and each day of these next 40 days, I'm going to get out of my comfort zone and go have a conversation with someone. I'm going to go do something for someone that meets a need that they have that maybe I would have walked right by. I'm going to, for the next 40 days, I'm going to take the money that I had used for Starbucks and I'm going to find someone homeless on the street, and that $8, I'm going to hand them $8 every day for the next 40 days. Does that hurt to not have your Starbucks? Sure, I'm sure it does. But am I doing something that's changing me, that's causing me to look more like Jesus, that's drawing me closer to the heart of Jesus, and it is hopefully molding me, transforming me, and preparing me for the person that I would love to be on the other side of this, as opposed to just simply giving something up for 40 days that I'm just going to pick right back up again on the other side of this. Yeah, there's no transformation.
I think that I just don't know that if we really sat and we pulled up every 40 in scriptures, that any of those came without a touch of tension and even ultimately sacrifice. I just don't know that we can get to that
can
place.
Be a byproduct of what you're doing, but it's not the focus.
Yeah, but I'm not calling anybody to go out and just say, make your life incredibly hard for no purpose at all. I mean, the whole thing has been to get your heart more aligned to the Father.
But I don't think it is for a lot of people.
But that's not my fault.
No, but that's the whole conversation is we're saying Lent can be extremely beneficial if done the right way.
Agreed. And that's what I'm saying. I wonder if we're saying the same thing and it's some wording semantics, or if we really kind of disagree at a root level, because I would say if Lent at its core is based out of Jesus's 40 days, there's incredible sacrifice in that leads to intimacy with the Father. That as we,
but the purpose wasn't the sacrifice. The purpose wasn't the sacrifice. The purpose was to prepare him for what was to come.
But Jesus's step into it was sacrifice.
Sure, but that wasn't the purpose.
And I'm not saying it is. I think I've always tried to say that, like, it's to get to the Father.
Exactly.
And but it has
for
to come.
A lot of people, that is not the purpose of Lent.
Agreed. And I think that's why I'm saying, I'm wondering, I think it's wording semantics, because everything you're saying, I feel like is exactly what I've said. Like, it's not just like Lent itself, not sacrifice, but Lent itself is day 40, end of day 40, to have started at one place in your relationship with the Father and to be more intimately connected to him at the end of those 40 days. From day 1 to day 40.
Exactly.
That does not come. Nothing in life comes without creating tension and moving forward. Like and like I would say the exact same thing you just said about the coffee thing.
I agree with you completely on that.
Which we talked about last episode was, hey, if you're like, I'm giving up Starbucks and I'm going to take that $8 and go across the street and go to Dunkin', that's not sacrifice. It's literally like that is not fasting. That is not lenting. I don't know what verb to use here, because I feel like that the sacrifice is creating tension, but there is a part of in that, like, you are doing that. And I think we even said, like, if you take that money and you save it up over 40 days and $300 and some dollars, and you go, who's somebody, who is a ministry, who's an organization. I mean, we talked about that. I agree 100% with those thoughts, but that comes with attention, because if you love, like I drink coffee because I love it.
But again, the tension is the byproduct. It's not the focus. The tension is something that happens in the process. It's not the focus of it. Spiritual practices should always be motivated by a desire to grow closer to God.
Sure.
Not just a religious duty.
Correct.
You agree with that. So instead of focusing on what to give up for Lent, instead of focusing on that, believers should ask, how can I use this period? How can I use this season to develop habits that will strengthen my faith and draw me closer to the Father? And I'm not sure what word you just decided on. If a Lenten is that a Lenten practice?
Lentil? That's bad.
Lentil, isn't that
a food.
vegetable? Yeah, a vegetable
something.
Or something like that. If the Lenten practice isn't what's the right word here?
I don't know that we have any right words anymore. We're just saying it and we'll get there eventually.
If the practice isn't fostering real spiritual growth, then I don't know that it's helpful.
No, I would agree. And 100%. And I mean, and it's what I love about what John Mark Comer and Tyler Staton and Dallas Willard and Richard Foster, a lot of these leaders inside of the formation space are teaching and creating and talking about.
But what you just said before I talked is exactly the term that's used. It's, what am I going to give up for Lent? That's the phrase that's used. What are you giving up for Lent? And I think that's the wrong focus.
So I don't know how you fully remove that question, though, because when Jesus went into the wilderness, he went into the wilderness with a desire to be closer to the Father, and he said as a part of that, I am giving up food. Like there is a giving up. The Israelites, they maybe didn't have a choice. They were getting ready to wonder because of their own stupidity. They had a choice before they were stupid. But they gave up, they had to give up a ton of what would be considered normalcy and comforts and just daily life routines because of, I mean, again, their situation. I think some of the situations are hard, especially when you start Old Testament, New Testament, all these things of trying to get through the 40s and in this conversation. But just looking at Jesus, I don't know how you fully remove the give up part. Because there has to be, like, you're going, man, I want to be closer to the Father. What's something that could be hindering me? I think, just being really transparent, people may feel that way about TV, but I'm going to be honest, if the vast majority of America turned off their entire TV for 40 days, I think we would see a lot of families get healed. I think we would see a lot of people become more conscious of their thoughts. If the AirPods came out and like, to get back to Vin Scully talking about the smell of the stadium and the birds chirping. If the AirPods came out and the screens went away, I think we would see people less stressed, less anxious, less worried. I think we would see so much change. So I'm not arguing for what I'm saying. Like, it may be a touch childish to go, I watch too much TV, and that's something I felt like that I could step away from for 40 days and turn my attention towards the Father. Like, I could step away from things. Like, I've watched some terrible movies in the last, I don't even know how far we are into this thing now, 20, 30 days, something like that. In the last 30 days, I've watched some terrible movies. And I kind of go, I understand why Christian film gets a bad rap. But I've watched some things that people would go, that's a terrible movie, that I'm going, I'm inspired to go dig into the scriptures and look at things differently. I very rarely watch Big Bang Theory or The Rookie and go, man, I'm really motivated to go dig into scriptures and dive into things. It tends to probably pull my heart away. And so I'm not trying to justify what I did. I don't have to. I mean, it was something I felt like deep in my heart I should do because I wanted to connect to the Father over these days.
But that's the key.
But there was still a sacrifice.
Sure. And I have no problem with that. In fact, I think that's great that there was something that you gave up in the process. What I'm saying is, I think that if all it is I'm giving, if you had, and I told you last week when we were talking about this, when you first told me what you were doing, I was like, I think that I don't get it until you said, this is transforming me. This is changing. And I think that I'm going to be something different on the other end than I was when I get in. If it's simply just, I'm giving up Coke for the next 40 days, without any hope that, how is this drawing me closer to Jesus? How is this making me how am I following him closer and knowing him deeper on the other side of this? If it's simply just, I'm giving this up for 40 days, then it's just an empty ritual.
I've thought about that part of it for years. And it's honestly why Lent, you want to go, if we want to go back, which we do not want to go back a question, we still have at least one more to answer. But to kind of reflect back to a question, why haven't churches that would not traditionally be considered high church type churches not embraced Lent? It's that reason right there. I remember being in high school and going, so like, I don't understand. Like, you're not drinking milk for 40 days. I don't understand what that means. I thought it did a body good. I don't understand I don't understand just the thought. And so there are moments and times I don't have to, by the way, something that maturity has brought me is I don't have to understand. I just think that at the end of the day, the goal, like you said, should be, especially with Lent, and maybe this is something that, maybe we talked about this. I don't remember. We talk a lot. The goal should be focused on the resurrection. The goal should be focused on Jesus and what the cross accomplished as a big part of this thing. Because there's no, I mean, why here? We could do it in October. If it's just, hey, 40 days, sacrifice, give up, focus on Jesus, move that way. Again, but in that journey, this 40 days has to move the needle, which is why the conversation that you just had around the coffee, if all you do is pocket $320 over a 40-day period and you go, cool, now my family and I are going to go to a nice dinner, you sacrificed nothing. And I know you don't think it's about sacrifice, but just giving up the coffee and putting $320 in your pocket, to me, I don't know how that moves you closer. But again, it gets fully, it's not my job to judge that. My job is to trust that if somebody's moving into a space where they're prayerfully wanting to look more like the Father, that giving up coffee, giving up $8 a day for 40 days and putting $320 in their pocket and not doing anything with that other than just putting it in their pocket, maybe that's the sacrifice. That's the tension. That's the turmoil. That's the space they need to create the agitation that creates the conversation with the Father. I don't, I would feel like what you said, I'm going to find a homeless person on the street, and every day I'm going to hand them $8. It's going to be painful because I got to go to the store. I got to go to the bank and get, $320 out in increments of $8. And I'm going to label it in envelopes, and I want to hand them an envelope every day for 40 days. And I want to have a small conversation with them. But I don't, if somebody just says, I'm just going to give up coffee, 40 days, 41, baby, coffee's back. I don't know what the value of that is, even if they're focusing on Jesus.
All right. So what are some ways that churches can embrace Lent? Maybe they've never practiced it before, never observed it before. What are some ways that churches can embrace Lent, observe Lent in a way that is biblically grounded and meaningful?
I feel like we've took, I don't know. I think that we've, the conversation has just been, how do you look more like the Father? How do you, for me, the challenge for people has been in Lent, who's one person? Who's somebody you can pray for every day? And again, like as you're fasting in this journey over 40 days, who's one person? Who's your one person that you're praying for to come to know Jesus? And pray that the Father in this space will draw your heart and every time you yearn for, because again, I think every time you yearn for a coffee, it reminds you to pray for that friend, for that person, and say, God, I really, your heart is for them. My heart wants to be more aligned to you. And I think inside of church, it's like, the goal is to look more like the Father. The Father sacrificed everything, including his Son, like to come for us. And I think that we can step into that space and be there. I mean, so I think that setting a clear, definite, like what you're talking about is like the goal is the Father, and how do we align our hearts to him and step into that space? And I think there's a challenge to it of, you are calling people to fast, and sometimes maybe giving a clear definitive of, here's one thing I would encourage you. If you don't know what to do, here's something you could look at.
Yeah, I think you're going to disagree with what I'm about to say.
I might,
but we've seen that a lot here today, and we'll walk out of here and hug each other.
But people really don't. I mean, I grew up very, very. We talked about this in the last episode. I grew up very, very, very independent Baptist, and so the fact that I probably have a little more, and I don't. It's not like I'm not even in a Southern Baptist church. But I probably theologically have a little bit of a Southern Baptist. Probably lean a little opposite, and you talk about being in the Stone Campbell and in Christian church. And so we do have a couple of theological differences, and we have some really good conversations around that. Sometimes you get to hear them raw on the air. But I don't have it. I mean, I think that's the spice of life, and I love this stuff.
This is the end of the Pulpit and Porch podcast. We will no longer be.
We hope 103 episodes was good for you.
Is I think there are some great opportunities for churches here. I think there are some really cool ministry opportunities that I don't know that I've seen churches do before. I know I never have done. And that's in the 40 days. You said, and you said it again, that what are you going to give up for Lent? I would love to see the terminology switched on its head to say, not what are you going to give up for Lent, but what are you going to pick up for Lent? What are you going to start doing for these next 40 days? And maybe it's something that the church pushes you towards, that we're going to give you this opportunity for the next 40 days of Lent, that we're going to push out a devotional, a personal Bible study every day at 6 a.m. It's going to be available on our social media every day for you to get up and have that ready for you for the next 40 days. For the next 40 days, we're going to give you this opportunity to come in and serve in this capacity in our community. We're going to do this for the next 40 days. We're going to ask you to be a part of this initiative that we're going to do for the next 40 days. It's going to culminate with this on Easter. Some church-wide initiative, church-wide opportunities that you give your people to take them from where I am to where I'll be over the course of the next 40 days that leads them somewhere. I think there's some great opportunities there for churches that is not just simply saying, you on your own, give something up. But here as a church, here's how we're going to celebrate Lent together by taking something on, by picking something up that we didn't have before. Instead of letting something go, we're going to pick something up that is going to serve others, love others, and draw us closer to Jesus and look more like the heart of Jesus.
I don't have an issue with that. Again, I think where we're at is a semantics thing, because I don't have an issue. I think for me, like I've told you,
I think in some ways there's semantics, but I do think you're pretty hung up on this idea that there has to be something that you give up for these 40 days.
I would love, and I don't, maybe we find every 40 in the Bible, but you talk about burning a podcast to the ground in a heartbeat. For the next number of weeks, all we're going to talk about
40 weeks,
we're going to talk about one thing in the Bible that's connected to a 40, and we're going to theologically argue that and or discuss or whatever. I still think there's a tension around the fact of I can't think of a 40 that didn't require sacrifice.
I'm not saying it doesn't
I know
require
you didn't.
sacrifice.
I know you're not.
Doing a Bible study every single day is a sacrifice.
That's what I was going to say. It's a wording semantics thing. Like, I don't know that anyone words Lent or fasting per se the way that you are. Maybe I'm just a grumpy old
And so if
Baptist
you want to
dude.
say that in committing to this 40 days of 15 minutes 5 minutes every day for the next 40 days, I am giving up 5 minutes of my time in order to sit and read, then great. There you go. You did it. You sacrificed.
And so, and I definitely catch the sarcasm in your statement.
Lots of sarcasm there.
But I also don't think that is a lost thing. I think it is a lost thing. I think self-denial is a problem in society, and it is a selfishness and self-centeredness that causes us to think that we are God, not that He is. And so in this denial, I believe there is great healing, because it starts to remind me that I am fully flawed, fully human, in need of a savior.
If it does that, then yes.
But if it doesn't, that is not my problem, or I would even say the scripture's problem.
I agree.
And so I'm my and your, as guys who still teach the Bible quite a bit throughout a year, is to call people to a more faithful following of the Father by modeling the life of Jesus. And neither one of us would argue that point. In that, I think that
Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness is descriptive, not prescriptive. Nowhere does He command us to do that. Nowhere is there a command to do this. Nowhere is there even a suggestion to do this. Find it for me.
No. I'm not saying that, but also too, we stepped into a world of something that's fully based around it. So then maybe Lent isn't something that the church should be doing. Maybe Lent isn't something that people should be doing.
Which is why most evangelical churches haven't practiced Lent for 500-600 years.
And I think that's the tension around it. It is, if you're going off of the model of why it was created, you have to look at the model of what was there. And I'm not saying, like, I've never even attempted to do a 40-day fast. Of food, like Jesus. I have never even remotely gone after that.
I think that David Blaine did it in one of his TV specials.
I have a friend who literally fasted a couple of times for food for 40 days. I know Jerry Falwell. I can't say I know. Jerry Falwell said he did it a couple of times. There are moments where I've heard of people, and actually met one that I'm really close to that has done that a time or two. But it wasn't about just being away. I mean, for him, like, when it was over, it wasn't like he's like, okay, I'm changing how I eat. He's like, I ate a whole lasagna. I mean, like, it like the goal was, in this moment, I was sacrificing food, and I focused daily. He said 40 days in, you're really focusing on who the Father is And inside of that tension, it's driving you to the Father, for reminding you, like you said earlier, that everything I need, my Father has it. Go passion worship. But I mean, it's those things. I'm not saying that that Jesus ever called us to fast for 40 days. I think he said, in this world, you'll have trouble. I think he said, while I'm here, my disciples aren't going to fast. John the Baptist's disciples fasted. Yours aren't. Why? Well, I'm here with them. But when I'm gone, they'll resume fasting. Like, and so whether it's 40 days, whether it's 3 days, like whether it's an hour, it's these things of fasting, which, by the way, I think it's the 24 hours. And that's what I think is set up a lot in scriptures. I think there's more of a tension there than what it is. Then maybe
so let's land this plane.
Yeah,
I think we're both saying that Lent can be a good thing.
It can be
if it points you towards Jesus, and if at the end of it you come out of it on the other side a different person than you were when you got in. If it's simply just a spiritual ritual, then it's probably empty. And that churches, if you choose not to observe Lent, okay. If you choose to, it can be a very beneficial tool to draw people towards Christ. We just finished spending a month on attractional versus transformational. It can be something very transformational in the lives of your people, if the focus is on the right thing.
Agreed.
We just landed that.
And again, I'm okay.
You want to do this again next week?
The same topic?
No. Just this.
Oh, the podcast?
You're not going to abandon. You're not going to jump ship.
Oh my goodness. There's so much people would have to learn about me if they like I love this.
We've got people listening to this right now saying, are they still friends?
Do they need to go to therapy? We might, but
we started
it's not
off
because of this.
Talking about baseball and your horrible idea.
And we ended with your horrible idea. No. No, I just think, oh my goodness. I literally could be on a podcast where somebody's like, hey, here's the topic we're going to take. Which side do you want? And I don't even have to agree with it. I would argue it for an hour every day. I do agree with what I've said today. And I'm not saying that there's not, I'm not saying there's not some flaws in it. I think the thing you said at the end of, hey, this whole deal, and it's like, this is why for 500 years now, the vast majority of Protestant churches have not followed Lent, and maybe we shouldn't. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm growing in this. I'm listening to people I respect, having conversations with people I respect. And in that, I think that's how, this is why baseball is important. Is people used to go to a baseball game and it took 4 hours and they sat in the stands and the game was slow. And they sat and they talked and they had conversations and they sat with their buddy and they drank a Coke and they ate peanuts and they had a hot dog. And when it was over, they had lived life together. We've talked about back porch and front porch communities. We are a back porch society now where we've built much bigger back porches and we no longer have front porches at all. We do not want to have our heads up and our ears open and our eyes ahead to see people where they are and have good conversations around things that are hard. And that is the brokenness of our society. I'm okay. And I will say it, in 6 months, if you and I sit around, because we're going to continue this conversation privately as we're driving places and doing things and texting and different stuff. And if I'm wrong, I'll say, hey, you were 100% right about this. And that leads to our conversation today. And I'm 100% okay with that. I feel at this point like good theologically and conversationally where I'm at, because I don't think we're that far off. It's a couple of semantic words, and I'm okay with those differences. But that's the tension in society. And there is a large portion of the Christian faith that has to be willing to sit across the table from somebody they care about and say, hey, tell me more about that, and be willing to have a little bit of what would be considered an argument or a heavy discussion around a topic and come out of it and go, let's go grab lunch. And then we're going to talk about baseball more and how stupid my idea of shortened games are. So I love this stuff. It is literally my favorite thing to do. And one of the reasons I don't do it more, and this is just me being transparent, I don't feel smart enough. And so it takes a lot of time for me to really work through some of these thoughts and ideas. And I know God doesn't need me to be smart enough on some things, but I don't intentionally engage in some stuff because I haven't had time to prep. And this is one that I got some time, and I enjoy these types of dialogues.
Sounds great, man. Hey, I love you.
I love you too.
And I still consider you kind of a friend, I guess.
But it's more about the baseball than the Lent.
I don't know.
Maybe both.
All right, we gotta wrap this up. We never gave any love to our sponsor, so I want to start off
who may
by
not be
saying,
our sponsor anymore.
Not after this one. That Higher Ministries is passionate about helping churches thrive by equipping leaders like you. With their experience coaching, practical resources, and strategic support, they'll help you overcome challenges and make a lasting impact in your community. We're grateful for their sponsorship of the Pulpit and Porch podcast, and you can learn more about them at higherministries.com. And we do want to thank you for listening to this edition of the Pulpit and Porch, for joining us on the porch for this conversation that started off with baseball and ended off with something a little bit more important in life, and that's Jesus. And so we do want to encourage you to tune in again next week. But in the meantime, you can join the conversation. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Lent and your conversations and your thoughts on a run rule in baseball. You can find us at the Pulpit and Porch on Facebook, Instagram, or visit us at higherministries.com. Until next week, have a great rest of your week and keep serving the Father.